Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It is January 27th, 2022, and we are here for part two of what is turning out to be an epic interview with YouTube internet sensations. You guys laugh every time I say that. Jordan and McKay, everybody. They have a super successful YouTube channel that's only been around for half a year or a little more, and they're already approaching the total subscribers of Mormon Stories podcast YouTube channel. So we're in awe. We're trying to learn everything we can from them. But most importantly, they have a cool, important Mormon story that needs to be told. We just spent 3 hours with McKay talking about his upbringing as a Mormon in Denver area, wanted long hair, listened to Screamo, secretly, occasionally watched an R movie, and in every other way was kind of a normal Mormon teen. We talked about his upbringing, how he got swept into a Mormon mission in Honduras, and we left part one with him coming home courageously and valiantly from his mission and ready to marry the love of his life, which ends up being Jordan, but we're not at that point in the story yet. Because we need to hear Jordan's Mormon story. So the focus for this this three-part episode is kind of a Gen Z Mormon stories. We did Losing Mormon Millennials with Samantha Shelley and Tanner Gilliland, otherwise known as Zelf on the Shelf. But we have not really done the Gen Z deep dive, and so that's what this series is. And so, McKay, thanks for your 3 hours. And Jordan,
thank you. Now
it's your turn. Are you ready for the spotlight?
We're going to turn over the time.
I'm ready for
something. You ready for the scrutiny?
Ready as I'm ever going to be, I guess.
And we are joined also by my partner in righteousness and goodness, my co-host, the one, the only, Kara Burrell.
Hey, guys.
Kara.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, John, Jordan, McKay.
Howdy.
What's going on, guys? Yeah, it's ready. Let's get into it.
And Kara, you planned this thing. Why did you want to do this again?
Oh, because I just wanted to get paid to spend like 7 hours with my friends. That's one reason. Okay. Also, yeah, they're actually pretty awesome. And I love what you said, that like this is going to be kind of a watershed moment. No, like a groundbreaking. This is the Gen Z kind of episode of kicking this off of what the new younger generation thinks about the church, their experiences lately. And I also think that they're very articulate, talented, insightful human beings, and also witty and funny and good to look at too. All of the things. Wow. You mark all the boxes.
You said so many nice things.
So much deception.
No.
Another way to summarize what Kara just said is that Kara's old, basically. Is that what you just said? You're old?
I can accept it. I hit my stride when I was in my 30s. That's how I feel right now. Like I'm really getting into my good years now. So it's not old. I'm just wise. So
seasoned.
Yeah. Seasoned. Yeah. Yeah, and they
nice
also
Canadian steak.
Yeah, I don't want to minimize that you guys also have a great TikTok channel as well, and they participated in the TikTok panel that I put together for the Big Thrive Day 2021. So they are multifaceted and have some good things to say, and they're just an important part of the ex-Mormon community, in my opinion. So, yeah, we had to wrangle them in here and hear their story start to finish.
I'm excited. And I think it's important to say on a more sobering note that this episode, we should just kind of let people know that Jordan, as I've read through the outline of your story, there's going to be a considerable amount of abuse, and we'll say sexual abuse and maybe even some physical and psychological abuse, which is another theme we've been covering on Mormon Stories podcast. And the truth is, like, sexual abuse is so rampant in the Mormon church that it's almost impossible to not cover it. And I don't mean to be glib, but anyway, for viewers and listeners who might be sensitive or triggered or have their own experience with trauma, or if young people are viewing or listening, please practice self-care or censorship or moderation, knowing that Jordan's going to be talking about some more heavy stuff. So without any further ado, not to start too heavy, but Jordan, how does your Mormon story begin?
Oh, man. Okay. Back to the very beginning, I guess. I come from more of a non-traditional Mormon family, I will say. my mother is Mormon, and we kind of were Jack Mormons for a little bit. But for the most part, my family background is on my mom's side. I have pioneer type energy going on over there, which goes pretty far back on my mom's side. And then my dad is actually a Nevermo. So he's not Mormon, nor has he ever been. Him and my mom got together when my mom wasn't attending church, so they were much more compatible.
Tell him what he says about Mormonism.
Oh, yeah. Just to sum up, my father told me as I was getting older within Mormonism that everything I needed to know about Mormonism I would learn from South Park. So, and he wasn't wrong. So he is not Mormon, never has been. He has been mostly supportive, but he also does not like it. So,
A healthy skeptic.
healthy skeptic. So kind of from there, I feel like because of that, I didn't really grow up with religion a ton, like super emphasized in the very beginning. My parents got divorced when I was 2. And so my mom had to work. She was a single mom. I didn't really have a like super Mormon like influx of things in the very beginning. And so we essentially went about without doing anything religious for like the first few years of my life. My mom wasn't invested. My grandma wasn't invested. My mom worked full time. So I was with my grandmother like 80 to 90% of the time because she wasn't around. She couldn't be because she traveled. So there really wasn't a whole lot going on Mormon wise, those first few years.
Meaning just, in your first couple of years of life?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Okay.
there was, after my parents got divorced, we moved to Idaho and lived there for a while. And we did kind of participate in some things, but not really much that I remember. So it wasn't like I had this grand Mormon experience in the first few years. But we eventually moved back to Denver. My mom elopes without telling anyone, which spurred our move back to Denver. And so we kind of just jumped right into Denver lifestyle. My grandma ended up coming with us, and we kind of just started over. And so my mom remarried, and we kind of started navigating whether or not we wanted to start going back to church now that we were in Denver. And ultimately, my mother decided that she wanted me to have the Mormon upbringing. She wanted to raise me in the church. And so we started going back. We participated regularly.
At what age?
I was,
Was that right before your baptism?
yes. So I was probably 7 at the time. I was about 7. So that was kind of a fresh start, jump back in kind of thing. I was thinking about this last night. I don't think I was ever blessed either. Because they weren't participating at that time. So I don't think I was even on church records until I was baptized. So that kind of precedes, getting back in the church. I turn 8, talks of baptism start coming around. And essentially my parents are kind of at odds over what to do with my baptism because my dad was pretty adamantly against it.
Do you know why?
I don't. I know it was a huge point of contention in their marriage because my mother had always said, when Jordan turns 8, she's going to be baptized. And my dad was like, no, she's not. And so I know that was a big point of contention. That wasn't why they ended up getting divorced, but I'm sure it contributed. So
your dad was never Mormon?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. And
But you don't know why he was opposed to your
no,
baptism?
he never said.
Never asked him?
Nope.
Okay.
And he was still supportive, though. He throughout the rest of my upbringing, he didn't like it, and he would tell me that he didn't, but he still was positive and, wasn't going to get into an argument with my mom about it. Anyway, so we decided that I was going to be baptized. I think my mom kind of took initiative. on that one. And it was awkward for me because I did not have a male priesthood holder in my home. So, which was somehow always brought up when you have a single mom and you're in the church.
For non-members, non-Mormons, what does that mean to not have a priesthood holder in the home in a practical sense? Or is it just a label of shame that really means nothing other than you just feel like there's something missing?
It totally is. That's absolutely what it is.
Well, I didn't mean to put that in your mouth.
No, but that's exactly what it is because it's, you know, it's super shame-based and it kind of flies in the face of the things that they say now that, you know, women hold some form of the priesthood and can in their homes kind of have that same energy because that's not the way it used to be. And my mom being like single in the beginning when we were living in Idaho, there was a lot of emphasis put on she needed all this support because we didn't have a male in the home. And so we don't have the male with special power in the house because my mom's second marriage was to another person who wasn't Mormon.
And how would that power be used in a Mormon context?
Very patriarchal.
No, I'm not.
To me.
No, like from a practical sense, what are the Mormon rituals or ordinances that a priesthood holding father would exercise in the home?
It's very ordinance based. It's very family prayer, scripture study, and then it's.
Well, you can do prayer and scripture study
Sure.
without a priesthood holder.
Yeah.
But the ordinance itself of baptism, you can't.
Okay.
You can't do.
Yeah,
But
and
also-
then there's the blessing of sick and
Yeah.
Tell people about that. What is that?
So I guess I'm better equipped to deal or to discuss it because it was something that I had common in my household. But when you were sick, your dad would give you a blessing. He would take consecrated oil that's set apart for the blessing of the sick and afflicted. He would anoint your head, and then he would give you a blessing of health. Or
Which according, and we're getting back to kind of superpowers again.
Yeah.
According to Mormon folklore, the male priesthood holder putting that oil on your head, putting his hands on your head and giving you the blessing.
Yeah.
Why would he do that? What would be the purpose of that?
so that you could get better, use God's ordained power in order to help you heal and help your body do its natural due.
And if and this is important, we've never really talked about this. If a righteous Mormon mom just plain old praised Heavenly Father to heal their kid, I mean, what's the implication?
It's not as good.
No.
And and what Jordan was saying, it's very patriarchal. Like in a lot of cases, my mom was the one taking care of me. But if my dad gave me and I'm not going to say this to like dig on them or anything. If my dad gave me a blessing and I got better soon after that, all that work that my mom put in to help me feel better is now overshadowed by it was the Lord's will to make you feel better.
Okay, we just triggered Kara. Kara's got a big old open mouth.
I need to go
what?
call my mom and go tell her how much I love her because my mom did she nursed me back to health when I was sick.
And then you'd be
Dad
like,
gets the-
Dad
And then
get the
dad
credit.
comes in with his priesthood and he's like
Priesthood power.
healed. And my mom's like, oh, thank you, my savior,
Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut in there, but I was
No.
like, Jordan
We
doesn't
have to
even
dig into
any
this.
experience.
So there's priesthood
single mom, being raised by my
blessings,
single mom. It's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
healings of the sick. There's also the father's blessing, which is a tradition in a more. Do you guys want to talk about what the father's blessing is?
Sure. That was something that we did in the start of the school year. We would always sit around for family home evening on a Monday night and get together, and my dad would go around and give us all a father's blessing so that we'd do good in the school year. And for whatever reason, it always worked better for me and not so well for my my older siblings, but
It's almost like a patriarchal blessing given each year by your dad.
Yeah.
But the point is that if you're, in your case, Jordan, if your sweet mom just says a prayer to Heavenly Father saying, hey, bless my kid in the school year, versus if she had a righteous priesthood holder in the home who could give a father's blessing, what are the implications, Jordan?
I mean, obviously, right? We got a power imbalance. We've got some problems there. But that's the thing. That's one of the stark contrasts between McKay and I is I never had any of that.
Yeah.
I didn't know father's blessings were a thing. I didn't know, I was never healed, feeling for the sick, blessed, any type of that. That never happened.
But here's the thing, it's manufactured scarcity.
Yeah.
Because nobody really believes that. I mean, nobody who's thinking believes that Mormon men, priesthood holders giving healing blessings really cures people of anything, or they would have an obligation to go around and heal the world. But since they aren't, those things are placebo at best. Yeah. So it's not a real service they're providing other than the perception of a service. Yeah. And the same with Father's blessings. And so so it's two things. It's a manufactured scarcity. It's a manufactured power, but then it's also a imposed deficiency on a Mormon home with a single mom.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to rant, but like I'm just kind of processing this on your mom and yours behalf.
Yeah. Well, it's a slight. I mean, it's a slight. And even as a kid, I was like, this is just unfair.
It's a TikTok for sure.
Right.
It is. And that was the other thing about my baptism is because I didn't have one of those people in the home, I had to ask my Sunday school teacher to do it. And that was like a point of, like, it was almost like a point of shame because it was so highlighted during my baptism that I didn't have a father who was going to be able to do it for me. And so...
If I can play Mormon's advocate for a second, I was just thinking... In my Mormon, if I, go back to my Mormon brain, I probably would have just, like, as a Mormon, I would have said, okay, well, God is still a good God. He will hear your prayers and he'll answer them no matter what. The priesthood thing is just at least so that you'll grow up and you'll recognize the difference maybe between not having a priesthood holder in the home and then strive for one in your future spouse. And that'll just make you emphasize it more. And it's all part of God's plan. His plan is the nuclear family, a mom and a dad. And you guys should be striving that if your home was broken, quote unquote, that you'll strive for something better and bigger. And that plan all is part of the gospel. Yeah. So I would have just been like, God's plan is still perfect, but he'll make exceptions. Did you ever think of things in that terms when you were growing up, or did you just feel slighted?
I felt slighted, but it was instilled to me that I knew I wanted to marry a returned missionary. Like that's what it set up for me essentially. But it was also something my mom used to kind of entice me to stay in the church because she was like, things would be easier and you'd have more support and you'd be able to access the priesthood and things if you marry a Mormon man. And so she kind of highlighted those things as I was growing up. And I look back on it now and it was really just a big emphasis to lead me right in this direction. Because she's like, look at how it is for us. And I can't do that. And we get treated differently because of it. And even when she remarried, I mean, she was married to a man and he was in our home and they still treated her like a single mom because he was a Mormon.
He didn't have the priesthood.
He didn't have the priesthood. So it's still, even with my stepdad being in the home, it was still it doesn't count. Like, it doesn't count.
He's not part of like the home teacher circuit in the ward.
Exactly.
Just like not part of the club.
Exactly. Yeah. And so my baptism was awkward in that sense because, other people in the ward attended it. I don't know if your family was there for that or not.
I don't know.
So you guys grew up in the same ward?
We did.
Yeah. I had the same Sunday school teacher that she had that baptized her. So
yeah. He died a few years ago. I loved him. He was a very nice man. But yeah, it just made for an awkward experience because it was like being paraded in my ward that, my mom and I would go to church alone. And it just was very highlighted for everyone else that even though my mom was remarried, it was just the two of us struggling in our non-priesthood place. So that made my baptism awkward. My dad did attend. I knew he felt weird about it, but he did go and he was supportive. I also did have Mormon family come from out of town. I call him the Mormon patriarch of our family. He attended because it was a big deal.
That notably could have done the baptism, but didn't.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
I didn't even think about that either. I just thought that they weren't there.
No, they did. They came.
That's weird.
That's interesting.
Okay.
I'm like piecing nuggets together as we go along.
This is therapy for you as well as all of us.
It is, because I'm remembering all these things now, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, so it was a big deal because my side of the family with my grandma and my mom, we were like the kind of the wayward ones. Because my grandma's sister's side of the family is this perfect, ideal Mormon family where there's like hundreds of them and, they've all been bishops and they're all super involved in the church. And then we have my grandma's side of the family with my mom and I and my grandma's other daughter who are not Mormon and are just kind of like chilling. And then my mom and I start going again. And so we kind of got treated like the golden children, I guess you could say, as things went forward. So that was my baptism. I think after that point, as I started to get a little older and head into kind of middle school and whatnot, I should backtrack. There was when we moved to Colorado, we had lots of family there. So it reignited some family relationships, which is when grooming for my abuser began, was because we had moved back. He was more present in our lives, and so it gave him more access to me.
So have you set up kind of when you say abuse, like?
This is kind of when the grooming begins.
Okay.
So
there's an abuser in your family?
Yes.
Okay.
So it didn't start out like in most experiences. It doesn't start out like, at the drop of the hat. There's usually some build up there. And so there was some things that happened along the lines of, this person's trying to build a relationship with me. He's trying to get closer to me. And it felt kind of weird to me in the beginning. And I knew there was something kind of off about it. And I even approached my mom about it a few times. And I was like, this is just like a lot. Like, we just moved back here.
You're how old?
9, around the 8 or 9, around the time it started happening. And so I was young. And even at that age, I was like, there's something off here. And so it just seemed like this family member wanted to get really close to me and really wanted to develop a relationship with me in the context of other relationships that just didn't seem normal. And he would be really touchy with me. So he would, he'd be grabbing me and, just being like overly touchy, and it read weird to me. So I brought it up to my mom a few times and I was like, this is weird. Like, I don't know. I might be over exaggerating. And she would tell me, he just wants to have a relationship with you. Like, he wants to get to know you, your family. He wants to, develop this relationship because you didn't have one before. And so I kind of wrote it off from that point, and was like, I guess this is just acceptable behavior, because my mom was the one that said it was okay and I trusted her. And so I kind of just let it go. And so it continued.
Do you get the sense that she just didn't believe it or didn't really understand?
At
least at first?
Yeah. In the beginning, I think she didn't. I don't even think she registered that something was off in the beginning. I think that was the furthest thing from her mindset at that point. So me, and I wasn't outright saying like, this person's like abusing me, because I hadn't exactly gone to that point yet. But there was definitely something off, and she read it completely different than I did. So things kind of start to escalate, as I get older, and it starts to turn between this abuser and I, it starts to turn more physical. And so when, this family member was close with my family, and so he was over quite a bit, and he would, I had older siblings that would, do like late night video game parties and things. And so it wouldn't be odd for him to be at our house in the late hours of the night. And so he had access to my room, and he had access to upstairs. So it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. And so that's when kind of things started initially happening was, at night when he would come over and spend time with my family or siblings, he would just kind of linger. And so that's when I started kind of putting pieces together at that point, because it was like, he's trying to initiate a relationship with me so that I can be more comfortable with him and think that, this is okay and that this is like normal behavior, and to also establish that, he's a well-respected family member. And so if I were to say anything, it probably would fall on deaf ears, which it did. But that's kind of when things initiated. So he started sexually abusing me when I was 9, probably 8 or 9, probably a year of us being there, was when it kind of initiated. And I did not do anything about it. I didn't tell my mom initially. I didn't bring it up. I continually told her that something was off. I was like, he's constantly touching me. Like it's weird. And there came a few points in time where she was like, I'll talk to him about it. I'll tell him to stop. And I don't know if she ever actually did that or not, but she would say that she would, and then the behavior would just continue. So even when I brought it up to her, and at that point, I think she thought maybe something was bizarre about it, but she still didn't, like she would talk to him and it would just continually happen again. And so that was kind of those first few years, and then that kind of continued. He was a member of the family that was over quite often, and so it wasn't difficult for him to have access to me. And I was so young that I didn't, I was afraid in some respects to tell my mom because I'd already approached her about things before, and she didn't really get it. And there was a lot of shame associated. Like, by that point I had primary lessons. I had learned about, some aspects of the law of chastity and things of that nature. So there was some assumptions there, especially as I got older, that there was something wrong or there was something shameful, even though I obviously could not consent, obviously.
I have a question I want to ask. First of all, I'm so terribly sorry that this happened to you. And hearing you tell the story it's making some thoughts or questions come up in my mind, which I think is just a product of me not doing the work to think about this like I should. So only answer whatever you're comfortable with. Sure. And Kara, if you have anything you want to add, that's great too. But it just occurred to me that potentially with a child might, how would a child even really understand what's going on if they're the recipient of certain types of abuse? Like, I didn't even understand how sex worked until I was a teenager. So it just occurred to me that, number one, a child might be a recipient of sexual abuse and not even really understand what's going on, even biologically or mechanically or physically, depending on what's going on. But also, they might even not understand that it's a terrible or an awful thing.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't want to be insensitive or ask questions that are out of
I think
place,
that's a good point.
But I guess I'm just trying to wonder how, even because I've never been abused that way at all. So I'm just wondering how a child might even process all that.
And I think that's the part about it that's so kind of confusing, because at that point in time, I had not even had like the sex talk, right? Like my mom had not introduced any of those things yet. I don't think it wasn't too long after that. But you don't know. It's just like this weird thing that's happening to you. And it feels kind of like, to me, it felt weird. Like it felt inappropriate, but I wasn't going to tell anybody about it. Because I didn't even, it's like you said, I didn't even know how to put things together. Like I wasn't able to articulate, how to even explain this to somebody, because I don't even understand it myself. So like, how do I go forward and explain this to somebody, especially when I've tried to talk to my mom about it and she's not receptive. And so it's just a total point of confusion because you don't understand what's going on.
And you have no power. And if, the two people on earth, the two adults on earth, where it's their job to keep you safe and protect you, when it's a parent, for example.
Yeah.
So like a kid, what's a kid to even think if it's an adult who's a trusted family member? Then it's got to be, I'm sure for some kids, it's got to be okay because it's an adult and they're family and they're with me.
Yeah.
Like I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it a little bit.
And it's hard because that's, as part of the grooming process, that's what it's set up to do, right? It's set up so that you're more comfortable with this family member that they've tried, some of them will try to tell you like, you can't, we have a relationship now, so you can't tell your parents what we're doing and things of that nature. And that never explicitly happened, but I was afraid to say anything. Like this family member was what I considered to be a powerful person. And I was not, even though I knew something was off and I didn't quite know what to do about it, I also recognized that if I were to share this kind of more explicitly with someone, that if he were to find out about it, that I might be in trouble. Yeah. And it's, it's when we're talking about power dynamics with this structure, it's, it's his words being double, triple my age against mine. And in the grand scheme of things, who are they going to listen to?
Yeah. It reminds me of that. Have you heard that Oprah quote where she's like, if the molester is any good, then the child won't know that they're being abused, and she got in some hot water over that, but it's basically communicating that you don't know you're not being hit. You're not screaming. You're not crying, but it's something that you'll have the word abused later in your life to look back and reflect on. And actually, now that I say that, it reminds me of the way that I was a Mormon until I was 30, and I didn't have the words to describe that intuition that something's wrong in here. And when you're a kid, I was abused as well as when I was a kid. And so it just reminds me of like, I don't know what this is. I know that my body parts are being touched and I'm touching body parts that I've been told are secret and sacred and that are not. So that there's something icky going on there that shouldn't be. But I can't put words to it because they're being so nice to me. Yeah. Yeah. So it reminds me a lot of this parallel of leaving the church where something's wrong, but a child or somebody else who's been indoctrinated, you haven't yet come to terms with that you're allowing your brain to go into the realm of maybe this is bad. I don't know what the word, think of all the words we use in psychology of like gaslighting or boundaries. You don't even know what your rights are. You don't know the words. You don't know what's mentally healthy yet because you're either a child or you've been indoctrinated. Exactly. You have to come into your own self to look back, with like 1,000-foot view and be like, oh, I can put a name and a word to that now. That's how I think of it.
Yeah. Because that's your reference point. Something's off, but you can't articulate it.
Right.
You don't know where to begin. So that was kind of the initiation of that and kind of where it began. I'm trying to think of what else I had on my outline from that point. I wrote down too many things.
I can ask you.
We can print it out.
So it says at that point that you had some problems being sexually harassed at school.
Oh, I have one in my purse.
Okay, I'll grab it.
Will you grab it? Yeah. I printed it out. I came prepared.
Yeah. Good. So, but your school, was that part of it? The school sexual harassment that Kara mentioned?
Yeah, it was, it was interesting because I went to kind of a school in kind of a more impoverished area, where it's kind of sad, but there was a lot of like gang type activity going on at like an elementary school level, which is kind of weird in retrospect to look back on, but it was not really a safe area. And so at that same time, I was in third grade. At that same time, I was being sexually harassed by a third grader. And you think a third grader, it's not like anything insane, but he was making sexual comments to me and I didn't know what they meant. And so I approached my teacher about it and was like, I don't know what this means, but this is what he keeps telling me. And my teacher was like, oh my God, and made a big deal out of it and sent him to the principal's office and called my mom. And so I knew that something was off. And so then again, I just have this kind of parallel experience of these kind of sexual in nature type things that I don't really know how to explain and I don't really still understand. And it was right after kind of that, I got moved schools. My mom pulled me out and moved me to a different school. And it was right around that point that she did decide to give me the sex talk. And I will give her credit in that fashion that I'm a former teacher. I work with a lot of students that grew up here. And the sex talk is not as prevalent here as it is in other places that I've seen. So I give my mom credit for actually having the talk because your parents did they?
They did.
Wasn't it like pretty minor though?
It was pretty minor, yeah. They read. My mom read us this picture book where I where I come from or something like that,
Yes.
which is really kind of silly or whatever. But I don't know. I didn't ever really feel comfortable talking about sex with my parents. That was the only time that I felt like I could answer or ask questions. And I didn't have any questions at the time. So anything after that, I just went unanswered or I found out on my own.
So I started putting 2 and 2 together at this point because
She has a talk with you.
she has a talk with me. And she went into detail, as much detail as you can give a third grader without it being like too much. And so I put 2 and 2 together and started realizing that this wasn't like, okay, this is kind of in the realm of what's happening to me. And the way my mom is, within the church, it's heavily framed as within, the bounds of marriage only. And that's the only time or place that that's appropriate. And so it started kind of setting off alarm bells. And I didn't know what to do because around the time of my mom's second marriage, which was in 2005, I want to say, around that time, her behavior towards me started to change a little bit in the dynamic of her new relationship. And so she started being subtly abusive to me during that time, at least mentally and verbally. And so I didn't feel like, even after we had this conversation, I didn't feel like I could come to her about those things because of the way that she treated me. It was not like, even at that time, I did not consider my mom to be a safe person. And so I couldn't go to her. And I knew by this point, I was starting more to wrap my mind around the consequences of potentially sharing this information. And my first thought was, 1, retaliation from my abuser, because I didn't even begin to understand what that would even look like. And 2, kind of what it meant for the dynamic of my family and whether or not the bishop would have to get involved and, all these kinds of things. So around this time is also the time that my mom becomes extremely less invested in me and what I'm doing. And I don't know if this was related to the fact that I kept approaching her about the fact that this family member was being inappropriate, or if it was because she was much more invested in her marriage at the time, which also could have been it. But her behavior in me shifted quite a bit to where she didn't care. She didn't care what I was doing. It was kind of the dynamic with her and her husband was they would constantly fight. And when they would fight, my mom would turn to me and she would spend time with me. And I would be like the token child during that period. And then when they weren't fighting and they were in good spirits with each other, then I was completely ignored. And so the only time that I really would get attention from my mother is when she and my stepdad were fighting. And so I kind of started to recognize this dynamic. And because she wouldn't give me attention or pretend to care the majority of the time, I started trying to do things to get her attention.
Yeah. She just incentivized you to cause conflict in their marriage, basically. Yeah.
And the ironic thing is she would, as years go on, she would get frustrated with how I felt about my stepdad, but the dynamic of their marriage essentially set it up to be that way. So I started faking things. I started faking injuries. I started faking sick because the only time that I could get her undevoted attention is when I was sick. And so I would fake things all the time. I would fake stomach aches. I went so far as to make myself sick in order to get attention from her because I was so deprived. And that started pretty young.
Yeah. Some of these ways that she described to me are really extreme. I think you should maybe share some of those.
So when I started faking sick all the time, my mom stopped believing me, right? As one does when, kids fake sick sometimes. I used to be a teacher. I get it. But it started getting to the point that no matter, when I was actually sick, my mom still didn't believe me. So I would go to pretty intense extents to try to get her to take seriously what I was doing. So I would, take bleach from under the bathroom sink, and I would pour it on my legs when I was in the shower to generate, because I have super sensitive skin. So it would generate this kind of insane reaction on my legs. And then I would put it away, wouldn't tell my mom what I did. And then I would get out of the shower and show her and be like, I don't know what's happening. This just started. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so I did that repeatedly. I did it with bleach. I did it with bathroom cleaner. Like, I did it with quite a variety of things. And then you eventually just start running out of things. Like, I can only do that so much so often to get her attention. And the more I did it, the less she cared. So unless it was like really severe, unless I was like, falling down the stairs or giving myself a concussion, which I did attempt to do, that was the only way that I could get attention. And even that stopped working.
Yeah. Sorry if I put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. I needed to bring that up because
Jordan, over the course of our relationship, will bring things up. And I'm like, oh, that's whatever. And then she will bring up the details of things. And I'm like, whoa, that is not okay kind of things that have happened to you. So in some instances, it's kind of necessary to paint a more accurate picture. It wasn't just laying on the heater vent so you feel hot when your mom touches you or whatever.
No, it wasn't. I went to pretty intense extents to try to get her to pay attention. And it didn't work. So once my mom got remarried, our family dynamic kind of changed because my stepdad was a different religion than my mom. So we started attending a non-denominational Christian church, which I had never been to before. My only experience was Mormonism. That was it. And it was a very relaxed, non-denominational church. Like, people wore jeans to services, and we went to a service on Saturday night, so we didn't have to wake up on Sunday morning. And there were the worship band was rock based, right? And so it was appealing. It was really appealing because it was so different than Mormonism. And so our time was kind of split. We would alternate every other week. I would go to Mormon church one week, and then we'd go to the non-denominational Christian church one week. And so we kind of fasted between the two. And then around this time is around the time that I start having some health problems that are becoming kind of more prevalent. I was getting constant UTIs, which is a huge sign typically of abuse when it continues happening. So I was getting constant UTIs. I had some other health problems that were kind of happening at the same time, and there wasn't really any explanation that anybody could come up with, which involved a lot of doctor's appointments, which garnered some attention from my mom. So I wasn't exactly unhappy about that scenario, but it kept happening. I kept getting UTIs, and no matter what I did, they just kept coming back. And so and I didn't even realize this until probably 3 or 4 months ago. And it's still bizarre to me because, as I paint this picture further, red flags are going up, right? Like, in the context of an adult who's seeing these kinds of things happening, red flags are popping up a little bit.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Another question is coming to my mind, and that's that if you're so starved for attention from your mom, then the abuse, which should be, in theory, experienced as all negative. I think you just said this, but if it ends up being experienced as, wow, at least I'm getting some attention, then there's this perverse, almost diabolical, incentive for you because at least someone's paying you attention.
Yeah. That's to me, it's the grossest dynamic of all of this, right? It's the screw up your brain type of dynamic. So I don't feel like even then, I don't feel like I could have told her and she would have listened, which is the most frustrating aspect about this as I continue to paint this picture because, as a child, your parents are the ones that advocate for you, right? Those are your people. Those are who you trust. And when these even when physical problems are manifesting that are things that I, personally can't control. It's not me, trying to get my mom's attention. It's things that are happening that I couldn't cause. Even that is still going unnoticed, right? And you can't, as a kid, you can't advocate for yourself because I didn't put UTI and sexual abuse together. Like I was 9. Like I couldn't have put those two things together. And so now I look back on that and I'm like physical red flags were popping up now. Now we've got my comments about me feeling like this is weird. Now I've got these physical manifestations that are happening. And this abuse is continuing to go on. Nothing changes. It continues as normal. And then I start middle school. And some things start to shift, essentially. Middle school is a tough time for anyone and everyone.
There's a reason why I glossed over that.
Middle school is like, the best I could explain it is like a disaster. I start to branch out as far as kind of my rebellion. My mom is super controlling, and I knew it, but I didn't realize it until I started getting older, because then I started to kind of branch out in what I was doing. So I started talking to boys, and started seeking that kind of attention from boys, because I wasn't getting it anywhere else. So I had to attempt to get it from the people that I was interacting with at school. And so I started, and it wasn't, in middle school, it wasn't anything crazy. Like I would be texting boys and my mom wasn't happy about it and wouldn't like it. And she would emphasize, church teachings to me and say, you're not supposed to be dating until you're 16 and you're not allowed to do X, Y, Z, and I'm not going to allow you to have boys over. And so she really emphasized those things. But middle school is when I started pushing those boundaries. And this is when her controlling nature and severe abuse starts to get really bad. I think my mom has some undiagnosed mental things, which are obviously out of her control. And as
we're saying, you're in a social, Masters of Social Work program, so you're being trained as a mental health professional.
I am.
So you have some training to at least be able to identify the
It's not like some
symptoms, the criteria.
WebMD diagnostic.
No, like I had to do a whole class on the DSM. Like I get it, and I'm not formally allowed to diagnose, nor am I qualified at this point in time. But I will strongly say that her behavior aligns strongly with borderline personality disorder. And so she was 0 to 60 in like 15 seconds. And as a child, I did not know how to stay in her good graces. Essentially, I couldn't, no matter what I did. She wasn't ever happy with the outcome. And one day she'd be like, "Oh my gosh, you're the best thing ever. And, I'm so glad we have such a close relationship." And then the next day it's like she's tearing me down for wearing something that she deemed inappropriate to school, it's not like, I'm trying to not like play down the things she did, but I mean, it was either she was enthralled with me and on cloud 9, she was like not speaking to me ever, or she was screaming at me. Like those were my 3 things, and there was no in between. And the only time that she would be paying attention to me or enthralled or trying to have a relationship with me would be in the context of her relationship with my stepdad being bad. And so literally my only other 2 points with her was her not speaking to me, which was her favorite tactic to use with me, or screaming at me. And I couldn't, no matter what I did, I couldn't escape it. And 90% of the time it wasn't, I look back now and I realize that it wasn't me. She took everything out on me. And so my childhood consisted of walking on eggshells because I was going to set her off somehow, some way. Like it was unavoidable. And so I essentially just had to get in the mindset of, I was like in survival mode for the good majority of my childhood. It was like perpetual fight or flight all the time between my sexual abuse and between my mom being totally unhinged. And screaming at me, it was like, every parent, gets mad at their kid and yells every once in a while, but it was unhinged. Like it was inappropriate. And so that's kind of where I got stuck, and I'm navigating middle school, and I'm navigating hormonal changes and puberty changes and things that are happening at that time. And I don't feel like I have an advocate because, one, I'm still being sexually abused, and two, she doesn't care. Like she doesn't pay any attention. She's not, like, her only investment in me was extremely superficial. Like, it was, my involvement with her was only when it had some kind of benefit to her, and it was usually to get back at my stepdad. And so I look back on that now, and it makes a lot more sense because at that time I was like, I'm going to have a crappy relationship with my stepdad because if they're fighting, then she comes to me. And we, there was no boundaries in my family. When we talk about, therapy terms, when we talk about enmeshment, that was 1,000% what was happening in my family. There was no boundaries between anybody. Like, we had no boundaries. Everybody overlapped into everyone mentally, physically, emotionally. Nobody was separated. Like, we were all just kind of meshed together in this, like, toxic kind of environment. And so that made for a lot of difficult things happening with my mom because she didn't understand that that was inappropriate. So then comes when I start my period for the first time. And this is the funny part about this is probably a month or two ago, maybe 3 months ago, I would have told this story and I would have laughed, and I thought it would be funny. And I had locked this little nugget away in my memory until a recent session with my therapist when I told her about it, and I thought it was funny. And she gave me this horrified look on her face, and I realized that it's not funny. So we are camping with extended family members. My abuser is present. And I start my period for the first time. Of course, it's in the wilderness because, the universe loves me, and that's just what happens. So we were not prepared for this. I think I was like 11 or 12. And we're camping, we're in the wilderness. I tell my mom, I'm like, obviously something's happened here. Like, and I had enough sex talk knowledge that I knew what was going on. And so I get situated and my mom's like, come here, we have to do something. And I still can't talk about this without laughing because I still think it's so insane. My mom gathers up all of our extended family. Okay. There's quite a few of them, my older siblings included. And she like stands us in a little circle. Like, we're going to have a little powwow type thing going on. So she puts us all in a circle, and then she makes us all hold hands because it's not weird enough, right? We're just getting weirder. She says she makes us stand all in a circle holding hands, and she's like, I have an announcement to make about Jordan. And I had no idea what was coming. This hit me like a freight train. She did not tell me. I had no prior knowledge, nothing. So she's like, I have an announcement to make about Jordan, and she has officially started her period, and she's becoming a woman. And I have never seen my brothers run out of a circle so quickly, by the way, which was funny. But she shared this with all of my extended family members, which I thought was kind of funny. And then I tell McKay like a few months ago, and again, McKay's like my reference, right? He's like my unbiased point of view when I tell him things and he looks at me like, oh my God, Jordan, what the hell did you just say? Yeah. Then I know it's bad. And that's exactly what happened here is I told McKay and he was like, that's not normal behavior. And so the first problem there is my abuser is present for this. And as we know with sexual abuse, especially of children, puberty tends to either start sexual abuse, change it, or stop it. And so that was the number one problem. But then my mother proceeded to tell this story to other people, like random coworkers of hers, friends, family, like people that I didn't even know. She started telling this story to, which to me was absolutely mortifying, right? Like, this is not...
Definition enmeshment.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
No boundaries.
None. No boundaries whatsoever. And that was like the prime example that I can think of her not having any, because that was a situation that I look back now on with my therapist's horrified face when I told her that it's so inappropriate, and it's just a complete demonstration of her lack of boundaries and her lack of any type of relationship with me to know that that was not something I would have appreciated. And not to mention now my abuser knows, and this changes kind of the dynamic of things, right? So that kind of initiated puberty, and my mom started to get kind of more unhinged with her behavior because I started to seek out ways to rebel. And I look back on that now as, one, I was grasping for any type of safety that I could get my hands on because I didn't feel safe in my own home. And two, I was trying to get from under my mom. And a lot of my mentality, especially as a preteen, was my mom was so cruel to me that I was like, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what she says, and I'm going to stick it to her. And that's going to be my goal going forward, which is essentially what I did, which kind of led me down the perceived Mormon wrong path that people don't want their kids to go down. And mind you, my mom weaponized all of the church teachings against me quite often. Anything and everything that she could use against me in a church context made it seem, I feel like she felt less like it was coming directly from her, and more she was like pushing this stuff on me because it's what Jesus says and it's what the Lord wants. And you have to follow these things, not because I'm telling you to, but because if you don't, you're going to go to hell. Now, mind you, probably one of the most important aspects in talking about my mom is she's extremely Satan-centered. I feel like my mom is more governed by Satan than she is by God, personally.
Feeling like if she doesn't follow it, there's like demonic forces can take over?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So my mom is very intense on the Satan piece, and she used this as a manipulation tactic with me.
And just to be clear, it's Mormon theology that Satan is a literal figure, that God, Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother or mothers created all these spiritual children in the preexistence, that Jesus was the firstborn spirit, and that his brother was Lucifer or Satan, and that a third of the hosts of heaven, a third of the spirit children of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother or mothers were cast out of heaven in the preexistence, and that they get to, and this almost sounds like Scientology now that I'm thinking about it, like the Thetans. Like they all were sent to earth and are all around tempting us and trying to get us to do evil. Not just Satan as a spirit, but Satan's children or siblings who are all bad. Mm-hmm. And so in Mormon supernatural theology, there are always evil spirits trying to get us to do bad. And so your mom, I was going to say, abuse happens in and out of Mormonism. So I love it that you're pulling in kind of the Mormon theological pieces to show that this is a Mormon story.
Yeah. So
in all this craziness, your mom is now we're introducing the Mormon teaching of evil spirits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've never encountered anybody who focuses on it as much as my mom does. You would probably say the same, right?
Absolutely.
I don't even know how to explain it. I 100% believe it's out of fear. She's motivated by fear more than anything else. And she's very, very against any type of, as most Mormons are, any type of like occult type things, tarot cards, astrology.
Even face cards have been prohibited in a Mormon context.
Yep.
Yeah.
Scary movies.
Yep. She is, and it's not even like she doesn't like it. It's like she's like full on scared of it. Like she's terrified of the energy, the evil that would bring in. Like she has one childhood story of using a Ouija board, right? As most people do. And that experience, like forever, I think that's part of what contributes to this nonsense. That she had one crazy experience with a Ouija board, and from that point forward, she was like, there is evil. Now, this was fueled by my Mormon patriarch family member because he performed an exorcism on someone while he was a bishop. And
Tell us what that is.
So
I didn't know there were such things as Mormon exorcisms.
I did not either until this instance. So this woman in my family member's ward had messed with something she wasn't supposed to mess with and had been allegedly and had been infested with demons, evil spirits, things of that nature. And so she essentially was possessed. And so my bishop family member took it upon himself that they needed to do something. And so they went over to her house and she was like unhinged. They say that she was like naked and running around like crazy and was just totally possessed by demons and all this crazy stuff. So my bishop family member and his counselor like essentially tackled her to the floor because they're fighting against her because she has the force of all these demons, right? And so this just sounds so crazy to tell back. But they're like, she has all the, I walked in the door and I just felt the power of Christ leave the room. Like I knew the whole house was filled with the devil. I felt like Satan was on the other side of the door and I had to come, face to face with them and I had to tackle this woman to the ground, to which they did. I'm not sure what they did. I don't know if it was like a, depart in the name of Jesus type, raise your arm to the square type thing or what it was. I don't know if they did a blessing. I don't know what it was. But essentially they tackled her to the ground, did that thing, and they watched the demons ascend from her.
And I'm surprised, Carrie, you say you didn't know that Mormon demonic possession was a thing because, number one, it's in the Bible. Jesus sees somebody who he says
there's a lot of
is
stuff
possessed.
in the Bible.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, we believe in Jesus, we believe in the Bible, and in the Bible, Jesus casts evil spirits into the pigs, and the pigs run off the, so I mean, it starts in the Bible, but then, if you read Mormon Doctrine with Bruce R. McConkie, he tells us not to use the Ouija boards, he talks about evil spirits and possession, but then me growing up, I was told in seminary all about these sorts of stories of missionaries in the Caribbean or in Latin America, and encountering a possessed investigator and the missionaries, casting out, just like in the Mormon Temple ceremony, where Satan, you raise your arm to the square and Satan is cast out of the garden. We're taught as Mormon priesthood holders, because women can't do this, that a male priesthood holder, if he encounters someone who's possessed by demons, can raise their arm to the square and using their priesthood, if they're worthy, cast out the demonic spirit. And I was told in the MTC of all sorts of demonic possessions and exorcisms as a Mormon kid. So that was definitely part of my Mormon upbringing.
If I may possess, no pun intended, our comment section of that happens very commonly. I didn't experience that, so it didn't happen.
Okay,
there we go.
Okay.
That's not my experience in the church. That doesn't happen.
Forget everything.
All fake. Sorry.
Forget everything I just said.
walking
Kara
about.
didn't experience it.
No, just kidding. Actually, my mom's a little hippy dippy, and she believes in that she has cast out many an imp, is what she calls them. You guys ever heard that? You ever called them
That
called
sounds
imps?
a little problematic.
They're like little. They're like Satan's littler demons, I think. That like anyway. Yeah, I have
totally.
some.
Okay.
I have some. We got mom trauma. We got sexual trauma. We're just like we got all kinds of things in common over here.
But this is where mental illness combined with a theology, a supernatural theology, can actually become very problematic. And it sounds like in your mom's case,
It creates the perfect storm.
Yeah. Well, and any other person listening to that would be like, it sounds like that person maybe needed a lot of medical intervention because maybe they were having a reaction to a drug or something like that, or B, some major mental health help because they might have been having an episode of some sort.
Yeah.
But
like psychosis comes to mind, not necessarily demon possession.
Those things couldn't be the thing that you think of first. It's got to be a demon possession, a demonic possession.
So they told this story to my mom, and it's burned in my brain, obviously, because my mom's like, the power of Satan, man. The power of Satan.
He'll get ya.
He's going to get you. It is, I heard more about Satan than I ever did about Jesus growing up. And so she used that to motivate me to do things. So she would tell me, she would say, I had a dream and Satan came to me in my dream and said that you're doing XYZ. Or I had Satan come into my dream last night. So what are you doing? So it was always
discernment again.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's like the inverse of the spirit of discernment. The devil told me.
which is so ironic. It's so funny. It is and it isn't. But that's fully what she believed. And she would use it just like many parents do with the spirit of discernment, is being able to say, this supernatural being told me that you're doing XYZ and I had a dream. So what are you doing? And
Why am I being affected by your actions, essentially?
well, and here's the thing. And here's what, similar to what your parents did that one time.
Yeah.
Is my mom would usually, my mom's a master manipulator, and she will collect information. She would go through my stuff, read my things, read my texts, anything that she could to garner information out of me. And then she would use the Satan excuse and be like, Satan appeared in my dreams. What are you doing? So it did this kind of mind warping thing to me that my mom always knew when I was doing something wrong. Like, my mom was in on it anytime I did anything. And it wasn't because I was like thinking that she had this, superhuman natural connection to something that was telling her. It was because she was going through my things and knew what I was doing.
Man. Yeah.
And so it's a mind
like a common
trip.
thread.
It's a total mind trip, because I thought that there was truly nothing. Like, I truly thought that she was tuned into every single thing that I was doing somehow, because the Lord,
Right.
Satan, whoever the hell was telling her these things.
I'm so proud of you. You're able to talk about this almost like with a smile on your face. I'm like, let's just take a pause to thank our sponsor, therapy. Jordan can tell us.
Seriously.
That's so intense. That just sounds like a
Hashtag
lifetime of
private practice. Out of pocket.
hashtag private practice out of pocket. God, yeah.
Yeah.
That just sounds like a lifetime of being manipulated and molded, and that you're able to reflect on that, especially going through your social work program now, that you can probably put better words and understanding to what happened. And
Yeah,
wow.
totally. And I think I kind of, this is why I pay my therapist the big bucks, right? I think I've
Out of pocket.
I think I've kind of come to the conclusion now that, and the problem with trauma is it sometimes comes to you piece by piece, right? I'm a firm believer in the brain presents you what you're able to handle at that given moment. And so over the last year, all these things have started to come back to me, and I've started remembering things more. And it's a continuous process. Every few weeks, I bring something else to McKay that he's like, what? What are you telling me?
Yeah.
Never, ever a dull moment.
Never, ever.
So I'm curious what your Mormon life was like as a teen, and how that weaves into the abuse and your mom.
So
I don't want to take you off from where you were going.
no, that's kind of where,
your
that's
mom
where I was going next.
not a healthy influence in your life. I'm
No.
gathering that.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So we move into my teen years, middle school. I start experimenting with rebellion more. I start hanging out with boys. I start inviting boys over to the house when my mom's not there. And I'm getting in trouble quite frequently. And I knew the rules. My mom would reaffirm to me all the time, you're not supposed to date until you're 16. You're not, even when you're 16, you're not going on single dates. You're not supposed to have a boyfriend. Those are the rules. We're sticking to it. And I didn't care. So I started having boys over behind her back. And luck of the draw, the one day I have one over, then while she's at work, she miraculously comes home at that time and finds me with this boy. We weren't doing anything. We were literally just sitting on the couch talking. So it wasn't even anything scandalous. But obviously she was pissed because, that's against the rules. And so she flies off the handle, goes totally whack. This is probably one of the most prevalent physical abuses that I ever had from her. And that was kind of the initiation of me deciding that Mormonism really wasn't for me. And I didn't want any part of it, because all I could see was it shaping my mother into somebody that, one, didn't care about who I was and was much more concerned about the church. And two, no matter what I did, I felt like I wasn't good enough. And I had major religious scrupulosity. I have OCD. And so I had, and continue to had up through even the most recent years, I had to pray a certain way. I had to say things a certain way. If I didn't say, I couldn't just say, I pray that my mom gets home safely from work, because the other implication of that is home safely could be she dies and goes back to heaven. So I would have to specify, I pray that my mom gets home safely to our home. And I had to do that with every single thing. And so it became really, really draining, because I couldn't continue to do that. I would be praying for hours, because it was all my OCD intrusiveness of, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And I would have to go through all these things like a checklist to make sure that I was covering everything. And by that point, I was just so overdoing that. And plus, I was messing around with boys. And so the law of chastity thing is just floating around in my brain. And I knew I was kind of getting too close to the edge. I was towing the line, and I knew that. And I didn't anticipate where I was going to go next, but I looked for any sense of safety and attention where I could get it. And so my freshman year of high school, the first boy who showed me any attention was a senior. And I knew, I had just turned 15. I knew that I should not have been doing this, but I was so desperate for anything that I snuck out of my house in the middle of the night, met up with this 18-year-old. And he picked me up. We went back to his house. We ended up having sex. I broke the law of chastity. He dropped me off at my house. I look back on that experience now, and I know it wasn't consensual. I didn't know it then, but I know it now.
Because he's 18. He's an adult.
It's also crime.
He's an adult.
Yeah.
I knew I was done for at that point. I had the chastity lessons in Young Women's. I had it pounded into my brain that sex before marriage is akin to murder. And so I basically at that point was ready to call it quits on Mormonism, which I essentially did. I stopped going. I pestered my mom enough about it that she stopped making me go. And I think my mom knew that something was happening at the time. But again, she didn't intervene. I pressed her about my sexual abuse again and again, just saying, this feels weird to me. Something's off. I don't think this is okay. And nothing happened. So I continued trying to initiate things with boys. And because I had already broken the law of chastity, I was like, I can keep going. I've already done the thing that's next to murder. I've already done it. And so from this point forward, what's stopping me from continuing to do it again? Because at this point, I'm already screwed, And so that essentially continued to happen for a little while. I got a boyfriend. I got a serious boyfriend. And he, for a while, was my safe place. He was the only way I could get away from my mom. And we had a sexual relationship, but it was consensual, and that was the only time, compared to the previous experience that I had that. And so, and he knows I'm doing this. And I appreciate him, because he was a safe space for me while I was, one, navigating me walking away from the church because I felt like a shitty person, and two, all the stuff that was going on with my mom. And so he really was a supportive person for me. And it started to kind of destigmatize the views that I had around sex, because they were obviously warped. The sexual abuse was still ongoing at that time. It was just more infrequent. But it started getting more severe. I don't know if that's the word. More intense. I was more aware of what was going on, and I knew my abuser was a powerful person, and I knew that there was nothing that I could do about it. And so at this point, I feel stuck, because I now know what's going on. I understand I have a sexual relationship outside of this that I've had now and I'm familiar with. And I know the first thing isn't supposed to be happening, but I also know that my mom isn't a safe person for me to go to with this information. So my mom decides that because I'm being so bad, that she needs to do something. So she puts me on a point system. And essentially, I have to go through this point system in order to not be sent to boarding school. So she threatens to send me to boarding school because I keep screwing around with boys. And so she gives me an Excel spreadsheet for the summer. And so essentially, I'm mortified. Like, I was in the worst depression of my life. I was self-harming. I legitimately thought that she was going to ship me to boarding school, and I was never going to see any of my family members ever again. I was absolutely terrified. And so she told me if I followed this point system for the whole summer, and if I earned enough points, then she wouldn't send me to boarding school. And so I did everything in my power. And this was no small task. Like, I literally had a spreadsheet of things I had to do. I had to do, 15 different tasks during the day. I had to, read my scriptures. I had to do a lesson on the Book of Mormon. I had to do, I had to spend so much time doing academic things. I had to spend 30 minutes reading. It was basically allotted so that every single second of my day was filled. And so I didn't have any opportunity to do anything bad. And I thought my butt was on the line. I really thought that she was going to send me to boarding school. And I cried every day that summer because I thought I was going to be shipped away from my family. I was absolutely horrified at what was going to happen. And she sat me down and told me she had one picked out. She told me she had picked out a boarding school and this is where I was going to go. And she led with, even though I could do all these things and do this point system, there might be a chance that she'd still send me anyway. And so I self-harmed. I did pretty frequently. The first time I did it, I showed her. And she was pissed beyond belief. It was an unhinged screaming fit. And she made me put a Band-Aid over it. She made me swear to my grandmother that I would lie to my grandmother if she asked about what I did. And then she made me wear long sleeves in the middle of summer until the scars healed. And so at this point, I'm desperate. I'm desperate. I'm in severe depression. I have severe anxiety. I'm trying to get over religious scrupulosity and feeling terrible that I'd walked away from the church and now I've lost this potential protection, that's around me from being in the church because I've committed the sin next to murder, right? So Lord isn't affording me any protection. So I was completely on my own. So I make it through that summer. She chooses not to send me to boarding school. She told me probably 2 years ago that she never was going to, which was real fun information for me to learn.
Icing on the cake. Well, and even then, your abuser had enough influence that he would convince her otherwise.
Well, that's the other thing about it. I guess that's the worst part, is I didn't even recognize the role that my abuser was probably playing in all of that, because he tended to be an advocate for me to my mom. And I look back on that now and I used to think somewhat fondly of that because it always felt to me like he had my back to my mom, which is obviously not what was happening. It was a tactic. It was a grooming technique. So I tell my mom, to this day, I regret doing this. Absolutely regret doing this. Because my mom still considered at this point, even though I wasn't going to church, my mom still considered herself Mormon. And so probably in my desperate attempt for attention, I tell her that I had sex in the middle of Walmart.
What aisle?
Here's the funny part is I had kind of teased it a bit and said that I had done some things like just in jest. And then she pestered me about it until I told her. So finally, we're in the middle of Walmart and she's finally gotten to me and I'm like, okay, I had sex. I don't know what to tell you. And we have never left a store so fast. My mom was hysterical for at least 3 days. She cried nonstop for 3 days. I told her that and she I can still see the look on her face when I told her. But essentially what she said was, you know what this means. And that was all she said to me for days. And I don't think I'd had depression. I felt low pretty often, but that was a huge blow because I knew exactly what she was talking about. I knew she was talking about the church. I knew she was talking about the law of chastity and that I'd broke it. And she knew that. And so she didn't talk to me for 3 to 5 days at least. She wouldn't speak to me.
Because in her mind, you've done what?
I've committed murder, essentially.
Sin next to murder.
Yep.
That's not exaggeration, right?
No, not at all. And that's exactly how she treated it. And I didn't know, I didn't know what to do. Still to this day, I regret telling her the moment it came out of my mouth, I knew it was a mistake. But yeah, that was a mistake. So later on in my sexual relationship with my boyfriend, I wasn't on birth control. And we've had 1 or 2 pregnancy scares because I wasn't on birth control. And so I told my mom that I wanted to get on birth control, and I framed it. I have endometriosis. There was a good reason, but I framed it in that context and said I needed it I needed it to control my cramps because they were so unmanageable. And she had the standard, what most Mormon moms, at least in my experience, say is being on birth control is like a invitation to allowing your kids to have sex, which we know is not the case. It took me probably 6 or 7 months of trying to convince her to get me on birth control. So she finally puts me on it. Right before that, I have a legitimate pregnancy scare where I had days late of a period. So I sneak myself to the doctor. And I have them do a pregnancy test. Now, mind you, I was 16 and I did not understand the concept of anything and everything that you have done in a physician's office gets billed to your parents' insurance. So
Itemized.
This is going. Oh, damn.
Yeah. So
Damn you, itemization.
Come on.
Yeah. So it takes insurance a minute to bill things. So I thought I'd gotten away with it. The pregnancy test was negative. I thought I was in the clear. I get home from school one night. My mom comes home late from work. It's probably 7 or 8 o'clock. It's dark out. She's like, hey, come here. I need to take you somewhere. And so I'm confused. She gets me in the car and we drive to a random parking lot. I don't even remember where it was. It was like an abandoned something parking lot. There was nobody there. And we pull in the parking lot. She doesn't say anything to me the whole ride over there. And I knew I was in trouble. I didn't know what for, and I knew it wasn't going to end. I knew it was going to be bad. So she parks the car and she doesn't say anything for 5 minutes. So I'm just sitting in the car. We're just staring out the window. And like I said, silence for her is her best manipulation tactic. And so finally, she pulls out what I assume was the bill from the insurance and she throws it in my face and she's like, what the F is this? And so that proceeded to be a hour-long screaming session where I didn't get much words in edgewise. I pretended to be stupid, which I honestly don't know how. She berated me for an hour, and I didn't tell her what I was doing. I didn't tell her anything, and I think she was frustrated that she wasn't going to get it out of me. So after an hour or so of her screaming at me, she finally gave up. And we went home, and that was the end of it. She never brought it up again. She pretty confidently knew at that point what was happening between me and my boyfriend. But at that point, essentially, I break up with my boyfriend right around that time. My friend commits suicide, he wasn't Mormon. It was extremely sad and unfortunate. And it was really hard at the time because I was navigating, I'm navigating my sexual abuse at that time. And then that happens. And for whatever reason around that period, because, of course, this is how my life goes, my sexual abuse started to become more frequent and it got worse. And so I went to my mom and I was like, I've got to be straight with you. There's something weird happening. I saw this family member. I saw this family member come in my room one night. I saw it, like with my own eyes, I saw it. And her response was, well, I'm sure he was just coming in to check on you. And so this was instance 552 of me trying to get her to pick up on what I was trying to say. And finally, I was at wit's end. So I told her, I was like, I don't know how to get you to understand this. So I'm going to need you. I'm 16 years old. I'm going to need you to buy a baby monitor to put in my room that connects to yours. I was 16. So we go to the store.
Really quick, really, I'm just, and you, I don't want you to share anything you're not comfortable sharing, but you could frame it as he's abusing me, but you framed it as I saw him come into my room.
Yes.
And so, I don't know. I'm not trying to get into details.
No, that's okay because it's the power dynamic. It's the distinction. It's the fear of retaliation that I'm trying to I'm inching closer to saying what's happening.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So it's in the beginning I would say, something's weird, something's off, he's touching me too much. And now I'm getting closer and closer to that line of I'm trying to do everything I can to not tell you this explicitly, but you're still not getting it.
Okay.
And so the baby monitor was the last possible thing that I could think of to try to establish for her that something was happening in my room at night with this abuser. And I could not get her to wrap her mind around why that was inappropriate. And I don't half the time I couldn't even get her to turn it on, but that's how desperate I was for her to try to pick up on something happening. That's the extent of where I was at that point. It was the final thing I had. I'm like, if this doesn't work, then I don't know. I don't know what's going to. At that point, I knew that this was the last thing before I basically had to outright tell her what was going on and risk whatever was going to happen to me at that point. And mind you, all of this is happening while in the back of my mind, I have these, when I was in Young Women's, I got the chewed up gum lesson where, the girls that didn't have sex are, these perfect unchewed pieces of gum that are very enticing to men. And the girls who did have sex are the chewed up pieces of gum that nobody wants. And so I didn't feel like I stood a chance. Because one, I was sexually abused. And so that right was taken away from me before I even had the option to consent. And two, I did have consensual sexual relationships as a teenager. And so I was like, either way, I'm screwed. I'm totally screwed. And so I had reconciled in my mind that there was no hope for me at that point. There was no way I could return. I did not even consider being able to talk to my bishop about it. I thought that I was too far gone. So all that's bouncing around in my brain at that time. And then my mom decides to have surgery. My mom decides to have a hysterectomy. And that's essentially when everything goes to crap. My mom had the surgery, got super sick. It did not go as planned. Things went poorly. She found out after the fact that she was allergic to narcotics, the medications, the pain pills that she was given. And so she was not in a stable frame of mind after her surgery. She was suicidal. And so we were trying to kind of keep things under wraps with her in our home. And I come home from work one night and she's in her bedroom with my stepdad and he's trying to get her away from the guns that they have in the room, and she's trying to grab guns. And so I'm pulling her off of my stepdad, trying to get her away from the guns that are in the closet. And I just knew at that point, I was like, I can't do this. And so I knew I had to get her out of the house. So my grandma stopped home on her way from work, and we dragged my mom out of the house and shoved her in the car and drove her to my grandmother's, because my grandma didn't have guns and we knew she was likely going to be safer there. And so in the context of all this, she's fighting with my stepdad, and I'm like, you're fighting with her while she's on drugs. Like, she's suicidal. You can't be having a regular conversation with her at this point. And so I essentially let him have it. And I'm like, you can't, she's not in the right frame of mind for this. And I'm tired of her dealing with you at this point. And so I was fine with not going back to my home for a decent amount of time. And I was really frustrated with everything that was going on in our family at the time. And so when we got to my grandmother's, something got into me. I don't know if it was Satan or whatever the hell it was, but something got into me, and I got on my mom's level and I said, I'm being sexually abused by this family member. And mind you, was that the best point in time for me to tell her that? Probably not. But I had tried so many times by that point that I didn't care anymore. And so I told her that, and she was hysterical for days. She cried from sun up to sundown. She was suicidal. Anytime my grandma and I had to take her anywhere, I would essentially have to hold her down in the back seat so she wouldn't try to jump out of the car onto the highway. And so I'm trying to control all of this while she's still in pain from the surgery. Nothing's working. She's suicidal. She's, my grandma and I cannot control her. She's absolutely hysterical every single day. And so my grandma and I finally get to the point where we're like, we need help. We can't do this. And so we call an extended family member who we consider the Mormon patriarch of our family. And
The exorcism guy
we
mentioned earlier.
And we call him and we say, because he's a priesthood holder, right? And it's just me, my grandma, and I. So I've got nothing. Like we're not active in the church at that point. So it's not like I could just call up the bishop and be like, hey, come over. Like we didn't have anything. So we turned to the priesthood because that was our last hope. And he comes down and is like, okay, she's like completely out of hand. And so she's a complete danger to herself. And so we take her to the hospital, and she stays there for a while on a behavioral health hold. And then after she comes out and it is in much a more stable kind of place, they deal with me outing my abuser. And so my patriarch family member essentially conspires with my mom to keep this whole thing under wraps. So they brief my abuser on what happened, and they tell him of the accusation that I've made. I did have a therapist at the time, and I told him what was happening in a very delicate manner. I knew what constituted needing to be reported. And so I framed it in a way where I was like, it could have been a dream. I'm not really sure. Because I presented it to him in truth of what happened. And he said,
Because he'd be a mandatory reporter.
Yes.
And you were afraid that he would call the police.
Yes.
Why?
My biggest fear was because he's a mandated reporter that he would have to call the police. I'd have to face retaliation for my abuser, and I might be taken away from my parents. Because sexual abuse from a family member, that's to me is
pretty heavy.
And my mind at the time was worth, that's easily something somebody could have been taken away for.
And even though your parents weren't protecting you, you still didn't want to be taken away from them.
That's the worst part about all this. As I look back on that now, and I had become so, I didn't realize how bad things were. And I would have I look back on it now, and I wish I would have told my therapist the truth. I wish I would have told him, because I know more, right? I know how kinship placements work, and I know I probably would have ended up with my grandmother, and, you know, things would have been different, but, you know, that's all hindsight now. But they decided, I told my mom that I had told my bishop, or not my bishop, I had told my therapist about what was going on after I revealed to her that I'd been abused. And she was like, well, that's a problem. So my uncle, we'll just call him an uncle, my uncle and my mom picked me up from school one day, put me in the back of their car. They're like, we're going to the therapist. I was like, okay. So mind you, this uncle that I'm talking about is a twice bishop. He is about as diehard Mormon as it gets. His whole life is based in the church. Anything and everything about him, he bleeds Mormon. So they drive me to my therapist's office, and on the way there, they essentially convince me that pressing charges or doing anything along those lines would be a mistake, and it would only lead to retribution for me. It was framed in the mind of, you know, it puts the family at stake. Which when we talk about shame cycle and Mormonism, like, we would rather like dump all of this. We would rather continue to deal with this behavior and conceal it rather than disrupt the perfect Mormon family that's not so perfect. Because revealing that would be worse than allowing sexual abuse to continue. So they bully me out of pressing charges. And essentially, I mean, it was pretty forceful. I knew I really didn't have an option. So they take me to the therapist. They tell me, you're going to go in and you're going to recant everything that you told your therapist. And I said, okay. So I went to the therapist. They send me into his office. I sit down and I don't tell him anything because I didn't know what to do. So I understood then that there was an element of therapist confidentiality there, that I could potentially tell him what was going on. And I kind of did in kind of a roundabout fashion. And so after the session, I don't recant it because I thought, you know, I was protected by confidentiality. So I walk back to our car, I get in, and the first thing that they say, they're like, did you recant your statement? Like, did you say that? Because they told me I needed to say I made it up. And I wasn't going to do it.
Wasn't that it was a dream or something?
Yeah, something along those lines. Like, either say that you imagined it, or you were crying for attention, or it was a dream, or I had to come up with some way that I made it up. And so I didn't. I went into the therapist. I didn't say anything. And so I come back to the car and I burst into tears, and I'm like, no, I couldn't do it. I couldn't recant it. I couldn't make it up. I couldn't do it. And so they drag me out of the car. I was unwilling at this point. I was kicking and screaming like I could not do this. So they storm me back into my therapist's office. I still remember he had people in the waiting room. And they storm back into my therapist's office, bust open my therapist's door, throw me on the couch, and they're like, tell him what you just told me. And so I don't know how my therapist didn't think that there was some weird stuff happening here. And I'm sure he wanted 10-foot pole distance between whatever the hell was happening in my family and his involvement in it. But they stood there in the doorway and they said, you know, she just said she made it all up. So she's going to tell you now that she made it all up. And I that was it for me at that point. I knew it was all over. So they tell him that. I run out of the therapist's office and make it to, it was the bathroom, and I just cried on the bathroom floor. And my mom had to peel me off the floor and throw me back into the car because I was at my wit's end at that point. It was like my second time bishop, perfect patriarch family member had participated in covering up sexual abuse from a family member in the name of protecting the family name and protecting potentially any involvement that he had that I don't know about.
I mean, my mind is blown on so many levels, starting with the fact that the Mormon leader who had been a bishop twice, it wasn't his immediate reaction, let's call the cops. But we know that this is how the Mormon Church and the Jehovah's Witnesses and other Scientology, like high demand religions and or cults, like rule number one, law firm, Kurt McConkie, whoever is, don't involve the police. Yep. We know that the Mormon Church set up a hotline, an alleged abuse hotline for these exact cases where when the bishop called Kurt McConkie, the law firm, the first advice was do not involve police. So on the one hand, I'm shocked that that wasn't what the Mormon bishop's first reaction was. And on the other hand, that's every abuse case within Mormonism I've ever heard. So I'm not shocked. But then I'm also shocked that they're going to force you to lie and recant it and pressure you. That's the opposite of not calling the police. I mean, that's the opposite of calling the police. That's
worse.
That's way worse. And then third, that like the people that you love and trust most, they're not showing concern for your well-being. They're not trying to get you help and care, make you safe. They're just trying to get you to say it never happened. I mean, I can see why a family wouldn't want family members to go to jail. I can see why a family wouldn't want to lose their livelihood. I can see why a family wouldn't want social embarrassment. But I'm thinking about having kids myself, and I'm just like, it's just, I can't even.
Totally.
Well, and the basis of all of it is my mom told me from the get-go that she doesn't believe me. Straight up to my face. I don't believe you. And there was a lot of blame thrown around that time too. That, in a lot of these situations where things get said like, well, what were you doing? What did you do that kind of initiated this kind of behavior?
Like she was putting it on you. If anything happened, it was on you probably.
Yep. So this happened around my 17th birthday.
And I mean, there's this idea in Mormonism of an age of accountability where like you're not responsible for what you do until you're 8. Well, there's actually, and of course you're not, but even for teens, if you're raised in a really abusive home, you're being sexually abused, you're being neglected by your parent, even a teen's not, fully. So like, I think about the bleach, you're bleaching your legs or you're self-harming. Yeah, that might make your mom say, well, I can't trust her. Or you're acting out sexually because that's kind of how you've been taught you can get attention and you have worth. And so then your mom encodes either your malingering, or you're sexually acting out as you being a broken, bad, toxic, defective person. You're really just trying to survive. But then it gives your mom her inability to keep you safe and to give you what you need as a parent, provides her with justification for then denying any belief or giving any credence to your claims of having been abused.
Yeah, that sums it up quite nicely.
Yeah.
How horrible, like what a terrible situation to be in. Like, it's just like my brain can't even do the math.
It was the most traumatizing thing I think I've ever experienced next to my C-section, but I was out of advocates. Like the only person I had was my grandma, and she believed me from the get-go. And she even tried to tell my mom. She was like, if anybody says anything like that, anytime anybody comes to you with a claim like that and says I'm being abused, you believe them. Like that's what you do. And so she was really the only thing I had to cling to during this whole time because she believed me and I knew she did, but she was the only one that I had. And so I remained with my grandmother, and I decided, kind of with my grandmother's support and against my mom's wishes, that I was going to live out my senior year in my grandma's house, which took me away from the frequent access that my abuser had to our previous home.
I just have to say one more time, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm thinking about McKenna Denson and Joseph Bishop and just all the cases where abusers prey on the most vulnerable people. And it's starting to come together for me, because if you're severely neglected and abused as a kid, you're going to develop coping mechanisms that include lying and hiding and acting out. But then by lying and hiding and acting out, then you're never believed for anything that you say when you actually come clean. So the abuse leads to behaviors that then allow the abusers and the enablers to completely discredit any position you have.
Yep.
And that's how, that's it. That's how
cycle.
Predators prey on the weak and vulnerable, the most weak and vulnerable. And they're locked. They have no power. They're in a system they can't escape.
Yep. That's exactly what it is.
Because they're not believed.
Yep. And I've learned this in my MSW program, and my therapist has said it enough. Usually in this situation, it's not the abuse that causes the most harm and the pain. It's how people in our lives respond to that abuse. And so for me, it's one thing to deal with the sexual abuse as it was. It's 8 million times more traumatizing for me to have a parent that straight up said she didn't believe me and thought that I had done something to warrant that behavior. So I told my mother when after things kind of mellowed out and my uncle, patriarch person, went back to where he lived and everything kind of mellowed out, I told her, I was like, if you continue to associate with this person, our relationship is effectively done. Like I can't have a relationship with you while you simultaneously have a relationship with this family member. Even if it's infrequent, even he's only coming over so often, like I don't care. You can't maintain a relationship like this. And so I stayed at my grandma's, and she told me that she wasn't going to continue to have contact with this person. She told me that she was going to cut off contact, that they weren't going to be allowed to come over anymore. And I believed her at first.
Which means that at some point she believed you.
Presumably, maybe, right?
Or at least took your threat seriously.
Yeah. I think, and that's the sad thing, is I think that's what it was. And that still holds true to this day, is if I threaten her with things she doesn't like, then she'll respond and act. But she told me, she was like, I'm going to break off contact with this person and they won't be around anymore. And I believed her initially. And then one night I had to go back over to my house where I used to live to pick up something, and I saw her car in the driveway. And I was like, that's interesting. And so I was like, okay. I went in, and lo and behold, he's there. And so I leave, and she's like, no, this is the last time. He's not coming over anymore. It's not going to happen again. And I believed her. And then she just perpetually lied to me about it for the rest of my senior year. She'd be like, no, he's not coming over. He just came over to drop something off. No, he's not staying. He just needed to, bring something by. Like, she would just give me 5 million different excuses about why they weren't having contact, even though that they were. So I essentially gave up. She wouldn't listen. I feel like at my core, she still doesn't believe me. And so our relationship was just kind of meh after that. Like, I continued things because it was easier for me than to not, and she still quite frightened me quite a bit. And so I kind of just allowed things to kind of fizzle out, and we just had kind of like a surface level relationship. And I was committed to, after all this happened, I was so lost that I committed myself to going back to church. I was so desperate about the situation. I felt like I had nowhere else to turn. And so I turned back to church. And so
in some sense, the church creates this environment where you feel without any resources or hope or any Any belief that things could ever get better. So you turn to the church.
Exactly.
It's like Kara says, the house always wins.
Yep. That's totally what it was. Like I felt like I had nothing. Like I had my grandmother who's always been supportive, and that was all I had. And so I started going back to church. I got super involved. I got super involved in a Relief Society. They put me over there since I was aging out of my senior year anyway. I was really connected to everyone and everything. I met with the bishop. Very nice man. This was right before McKay's dad became my bishop.
Took over as bishop.
And so I owned who I was in church. I owned it. I went before the congregation. I said my piece. I told people what I had done.
Meaning what?
I taught a lesson in young women's where I told the girls what I had done. I told the girls that I'd had sex. I broke the law of chastity. I told them that it was a mistake. I told them...
You were the cautionary tale. You offered yourself up as the cautionary tale.
I absolutely did.
The example of chewed gum.
Don't be like me.
And that's exactly what I said. And I cried. And mind you, and this is, kind of a precursor to McKay and I's story, but his mom was in Young Women's at the time. So I shared all of this information in front of my future mother-in-law.
But you probably didn't share that you had been abused from a young age.
No, I didn't.
So it's all on you. It's not like I was neglected, I was abused psychologically and sexually.
And that's how I felt.
It's just I was the bad person. I was bad and naughty. Don't be like me.
That's how I felt. And I 100% took it on as all of mine. Like I didn't, as a teenager, especially going back to church, I didn't pay any attention to that this stuff happened to me because of, I was led down this path because I was abused. Like I never looked at it from that mindset. I knew this, like doing this and going back to church and sharing this with the young women was like recompense for me, like being back. Like I felt I had like dues to pay because everybody knew I fell off the wagon. We went to high school with other Mormons. Like I was the project. I was the kid that never went to church that all the other Mormon kids would try to get me to go.
Yeah. I remember one of the earliest memories I have of the mention of you was we were registering for that year at our high school, and my mom mentioned, "Oh, there's Jordan's mom. I'm going to go say hi to her." And I was like, "Jordan who? I don't even know who you're talking about." In our ward. And that was just kind of the vibe that you always had for
I was the
probably
black
everybody
sheep
else.
in the beginning, and that's why I didn't want to be there. So I knew when I had to go back to church that I had to own my stuff because that was the only way that anybody in the church was going to accept me for who I was, because they thought that I was leading this like secret double lifestyle and that I hadn't done my dues. I hadn't, used the atonement, got to the bishop, confessed my stuff. And so I felt like I had to like bare my soul to these people in order for them to accept me.
There's this line from the musical Wicked: the most celebrated are the rehabilitated.
Absolutely.
It's a way for you to you didn't have credibility, but if you could be, the Savior's like, redemptive object lesson, then all of a sudden you could be respected in the community.
Yeah.
Suddenly you have value again.
Yeah. And that was my goal. It was like if I sacrifice myself as the sacrificial lamb, and everybody's like, you know what, she's changed. She's the example. The girls can now look up to her because she's changed. She's made the right choices, and that's all I wanted. I mean, I needed some kind of support system, and the church was the only thing that I figured I had. And so from that point forward, I was more invested in the church than I ever was before. I went to church every Sunday. I read scriptures. I prayed every night. I did the Mormon checklist thoroughly every single day. And I knew that I was going to move to Utah. Like that was my goal, because Utah is, Zion, it's where all the Mormons are. And so I figured this was the perfect place for me to land. It also got me away from my mom. And so I graduated. I got accepted into the U, and I moved to Utah. And I threw all of my weight, time, money, everything into the church. And so I immediately jumped into the YSA ward at the U, which was a bit of a hot mess, but most YSA wards are, especially at the non-Mormon church schools. And so I jumped in. I had a calling. I was on ward council. I was at church 4 or 5 nights a week. I was super involved.
And you're like 18 at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're like become the model Mormon overnight, basically.
Yeah.
Basically. It was like a rebaptism. It was like a
Being born again. You were born again, as
Yep.
Jesus
A
would
new
say.
creature.
It was a new creature Mormon.
New creature.
Were you
Yep.
happy?
That's a loaded question, Kara.
I'm just I'm thinking
That's a
in my
great
head.
question.
Because
a good question.
we all know girls like this that grew up like one girl in the ward. She's the one who went off. She had sex. She comes from a troubled home. Like we're so happy she's here at church. Everyone be nice.
Yep.
And she is the cautionary tale for all of us to go do that because she was living like a really tumultuous life out there. But now she's in the church, and now look how happy she is. Look how cute her outfit is. She's giggling with us at church. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, as somebody who's kind of lived that life, because every circle's got a girl who went astray and came back.
Yep.
But did the church make you happy? At least in your mind, you can always look back and say, like, I didn't know what true happiness was. But in your mind, did the church make you happy? Did following the rules and sticking to, living with the Holy Ghost, were you happy?
I think at that point I was. I think I had sold myself on the church being my anchor. Like I had convinced myself that this was my way to fixing my life.
Of course. Like, there's a lot of people that leave Mormonism under this impression that you leave a high demand religion, that means you're going to be happy. But the truth is that having an identity, having a moral code, having community, having a sense of meaning and of purpose, and, resolved concerns about the afterlife, even a sense of spirituality, a connection to something higher, those are good things. Yeah. And even if a church that's false or in some ways very abusive is still providing all those things. Yeah. And there's something better than an imperfect or a flawed or even a semi-abusive system. And that's no system. Because if you have no system, that means you have no morality, no spirituality, no friends, no community, no sense of meaning and purpose, no resolution for the afterlife, no spirituality. And that's not good. A lone monkey is a dead monkey. So of course you were happy.
Yeah. It gave me all the things I didn't have.
Exactly. That's part of the rub is that the church, any high demand religion, it doesn't matter whether it's holy hell, the or wild country or Nexium, the vow, signed, going clear, pick your cult documentary and the people are going to say the happiest I ever was in my life was when I was in the full level of devotion to the cult or the high demand religion. Yes, cult members are super happy.
Yeah.
You're
invested in your growth, it sounds like. Yeah. You had lived a certain type of life before and you're like, now I'm invested in my growth and I know how to do it. And especially with the church, you're constantly looking for reinforcements that you're doing the right thing in life. And you'll get them. If you go to the Mormon church, you'll be patted on the back for doing your calling, for showing up, for reading your scriptures, for sharing a thought in Sunday school. You have the reinforcements that you're on the right track. And in a lot of ways, it is. I remember John in my Mormon Stories interview talking about my mom joining the church when she was younger because she was raised by an alcoholic. And it was like, because it was a level up at that point. Like she was like cult fodder is what you called it back then. It was like, it does make sense.
It does.
Yeah.
And that's exactly that. I mean, it gave me everything that I needed. And so I took it upon myself. I felt like I had to be, when I joined my YSA ward in college, I felt like I had to be the people that like redirected the wayward women. Like I felt like I had to be that person. Like I had a personal obligation to find the women that were like me.
Yeah.
And to bring them back to the church. And I was I had a friend, and bless her heart, she's still Mormon. I had joined a sorority at the U, and she was one of the only other former Mormon women that was in my sorority.
Was it the Mormon? There's a Mormon sorority at the U, right?
Well,
Is there?
not sorority. There's a Mormon fraternity.
Okay.
There's like certain ones that have more Mormons than others.
Okay. I thought there was actually one that was like a faux sorority that was just Mormon.
It could be.
Okay.
I was in an actual like
Okay.
chartered.
You were in a real one.
I was an Alpha Chi Omega, but
Okay.
there was one other girl in my house that used to be Mormon. And so she was like, I used to be Mormon, but I broke the law of chastity and did it with a bunch of dudes. And so, now I can't go back. And so slowly over the period of like 5 or 6 months, I essentially convinced her to go back to church. And she was like, I need to confess to the bishop. Like, I really need to talk to him about it. And I need to get my life in order. But she's like, I'm so nervous to talk to my bishop about my sexual sins. I don't think I can do it. And so I told her I would drive her to the interview with the bishop and wait for her in the waiting room while she had the interview with the bishop. And that's exactly what I did. I drove her to the bishop's office, and essentially, I guess you could kind of call it a form of coercion, where I basically drove her, made sure she got there, walked her to the bishop's office, and waited for her in the waiting room. And I probably regret that now. Because nobody should be forced essentially into making those decisions. But I felt like that was recompense for what I had done. I felt this obligation to fix the other people who had done what I did and give them a chance to not fall into the same patterns that I was in. And I was so passionate about all this, and so in the church, and I knew that I wasn't in any serious relationships, and so I wasn't going to get married anytime soon. So I went to the bishop and I said, I want to get endowed. And I thought a lot about that choice, and the church, holds the temple as the pinnacle of Mormonism. And so I knew that was like the next big step.
Describe endowment to a never Mormon.
You laugh.
Well, you guys have done YouTube videos about this, right?
Our most
In
recent
depth.
thing, yeah. And it was 3 hour-and-a-half long episodes in order to just
Okay.
overview it. But
So we'll
go ahead
include
and
links
give
in
your
the show
best.
notes to your endowment episodes on YouTube, where I guess we can talk about this next episode, where you actually dress in the temple clothes and discuss the signs, tokens, and penalties and covenants and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in 30 seconds, what is the endowment?
Go.
So my perception was, it's an endowment. So it was an endowment of power onto me that was a special protection.
By the church.
By the church.
In the temple.
And it was supposed to be this like pinnacle Mormon spiritual experience. Like, it's emphasized to like, this is the house of the Lord. This is the big one. Like, this is the thing that you build up to your whole life, either when you get married or you go on a mission. Like, this is the big one. And so I was invested. I wanted to wear the garments. I wanted to have that protection, that spiritual protection that's associated with it. I felt like it made me more worthy as a human being, that I was able to go through and do this. And I feel like a lot of it for me was because people didn't take me seriously because I had been a wayward kid. I felt like me going through the temple for the first time and getting my endowments before other people did was like a physical demonstration of me showing people that I'm worthy.
I mean, there's a level where so much of Mormonism is just beautiful and clean and structured and orderly and edifying. And that's the Mormonism I grew up in.
Yeah.
But what's blowing my mind is I'm looking at it from your perspective growing up. It was the church that made your mom think you were bad and dirty. It was the church that covered up the abuse. It was the church that drove you to feel so isolated, so desperate, so bad, so sinful, so toxic that you felt worthless and powerless and desperate, such that you would turn back to the church to get all the things that you felt like you were missing or needed to be happy.
Yep.
And so there's something I know that no one on the Mormon angle, from the believing Mormon angle, from the church's angle, they're just teaching structure and order and righteousness and virtue and goodness. But what they did is they completely, the Mormon paradigm basically sabotaged your childhood and youth, drove you to the point of desperation, and then the church presents itself as your only hope for happiness and power. And then they present the temple ceremony as and then that's how they lock you in. They created the deficit and the problem and the desperation, and then they offer themselves up as the solution to it.
Exactly.
And then you feel like you don't have power without the church, and you don't have hope for happiness without the church. When they created that feeling of worthlessness and desperation in the first place.
Yeah.
Am I being too dramatic?
I would just change the wording of they, because we have to make sure that we always separate for people who don't get it. That we're talking about a system.
It's the system.
Versus people who do think that is the best, with the best of intentions, thinking that will set a person up for success. Of course, you'll get more blessings. You'll be closer to God if you can be able to do all these things.
Get good jobs, get a good education,
it's
have a good
with
family.
people's best intent that they're thinking this is the best system. This is the fruit that they got, and they think it's a good fruit, not knowing that there's a whole other problem of a spiral that can lead into. But
I think it's easier to see it through that good lens when people like John or myself, where we didn't have a lot of issues growing up. The church was made for white, straight people like us. We didn't have sexual abuse or anything going on, I'm assuming. Nope. And definitely on my end. So really it just works for us.
Yeah.
And when we shift the lens and look at through the eyes of somebody who was abused, who the system left for cannon fodder, it's a whole different story.
And I also just have to add, even with you, Karen, what I know about your upbringing, women are sometimes girls and women are ground to sausage, but they're not in power in the church. So they're stuck. If men need it, the women are worthless without the church. And so of course they're second-class citizens because they're ground down to sausage psychologically by the time they're adults, oftentimes.
A little bit.
And so they're I don't get the priesthood. That's what the guys do because I'm not worth much. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know if that makes
there's
sense.
a little bit of this element I just remembered remember when McKay was talking about this girl could only imagine marrying a returned missionary. Yeah. I'm thinking back to I didn't share a whole lot about my sexual abuse in my Mormon Stories interview because I just didn't feel like it was super relevant. But actually, now that I think about it, that is kind of relevant that I'm sexually abused and I'm thinking the only possible place that I ever want to experience sex ever again is with a returned missionary, somebody who will only, that was my idea of the paradigm that I was sealed to. I only want a really straight A student, a really good guy who's going to treat me well. That doesn't happen all the time. Returned missionary, it's just it's a bag of, broken toys sometimes. Who knows what you're going to get? Yeah, I got me a good one, however. But as a woman, you're not usually emphasized that you're going to have your own career. And so you're just looking for a future with a returned missionary, that's kind of going to be your savior. You're not given a lot of the tools to think for yourself, to provide a future for yourself. And so I'm only going to attract a returned missionary if I'm super worthy. And my purity and my virtue is all intact too. So it does. So when you were mentioning that you're kind of ground down to it. Yeah. Now that I look back at my Mormon experience and put it like that, I was I probably felt like I was about this big. Yeah. If I looked out at the ground world, I didn't feel like I had, I don't know, the way I feel now, just like an ex-Mormon woman where I was I'm a badass bitch. But when I'm there looking at myself in the church, I felt about this small. You know?
Yeah.
But again, I'm just having this aha moment. One of the things that caused me to really get angry at my bishop at the end of my time as a member, right before I got excommunicated, I started to get really strident. And you know what made me super mad? What made me super mad is the temple ceremony had been changed. So basically the Von Wagner guy, who is actually a sexual predator himself, he updates the temple ceremony and they took out a bunch of the barbaric stuff that I always hated. And I hadn't been in the temple in a while. Sterling Von Wagner was his name.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, I want to go to the temple. But I was a progressive, Mormon Stories podcast Mormon by then. And I'd baptized my son and I'm like, hey, Bishop, I want to go back to the temple. Right?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, let me talk to the powers that be, talks to the stake president, whatever. And it all comes back. No, you can't go to the temple. And I just want to make this point. So I was like, that's it. I'm not going to stay in the church if I can't go to the temple. And you women in Mormonism are literally structurally second-class citizens from the very start. It's not just like, oh, this one ordinance you can't partake of. You got nothing. You got no access to any of the power or the ordinances or the structure. And I'm whining because I can't go to the temple because I have some philosophical interest and curiosity. What would make it so I'm outraged and I'm going to really be strident now? What would make me feel that way when you guys are literally structural second-class citizens from birth because of your anatomy? Like, I'm sorry that it's not like I just realized this, but
It does sound like that.
Yeah.
Just realized.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just hits you.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
well, what would
From
make
the age of 8, when you get baptized, up until you're endowed, nothing.
But how do you get in half of your population to just accept from birth that they're going to be second-class citizens and to not ever feel like it's even their place to object or complain?
Gender roles.
Patriarchy.
Gender roles. That's my honest answer. I was like an outspoken anti-feminist like 3 or 4 years ago, and I would have told you. I would have said I am totally happy with the second place citizenship.
When ordained women did their
Because-
thing and they asked that someone asked Mormons, like, do you want the priesthood? Do you want women to have the priesthood? More Mormon men wanted women to have the priesthood than the Mormon women did. The Mormon women wanted the priesthood for themselves less than the men wanted the women to have the priesthood.
That's the dynamic. My mom used to say, I don't want it. Like, I don't want the priesthood.
Not only
It's too
did I
much
not want the responsibility,
Yeah.
like it just sounded like
Yeah.
I would have said literally gender roles because God wants men to have this because they need to learn, and women are already more advanced than men, and we're already good. We have our roles in the church; they have theirs. This is God's restoration. Who are we to mess with it?
And all I'm saying is, hearing your story of how you were treated, and Kara knowing what I know about your story, of course you reach adulthood saying, yeah, that's not, priesthood isn't what we get. We just get whatever scraps the church offers us, but we're not going to ask any questions or make a stink. And to this day, it's 2022. Like, ordained women happened in 2012. Like, we're 10 years past ordained women, and Mormon women don't care.
You know, just remember that anything that is counter to the church's teachings that are like culturally acceptable, like the feminist movement, it is seen that you are more spiritually advanced if you oppose those movements. So remember, like Benson with the civil rights movement and communism and things, you are more of a righteous Mormon if you side with the prophet over your own instinct. You're spiritually advanced. I saw it that same way too, that like, while the world would say that I should be looking for equality, I am spiritually above that.
Yep.
That I know the Lord's way. You start with the presumption that the church is true, and you can make an argument for it.
Yep.
Like
Wendy Nelson.
I totally get it.
Put an exclamation point behind everything that the prophet says and anything else you question.
Yeah. Yeah. If the prophet
That's just
said it,
recent.
it gives me shivers down my spine when he said that. Yeah.
And I'm just saying, you talk about grooming. You were groomed. A church, unfortunately, this church grooms its women to reach adulthood saying, yeah, of course I'm a second-class citizen. And why would I ever question that?
Under the guise of like, we love women and women are so
Women are
important
the
in the
most
nuclear
important.
family and like all that crap. It's
Anyway.
not true.
I don't mean to
produce
derail
more
you.
babies for us because that's the only way we're growing.
Yep.
And we're
I
going to
don't mean to-
celebrate the small differences and like allowing you to witness in baptisms in the temple. Congratulations.
I didn't mean to derail your story, but
No.
forgive me as I'm having some aha moments or re-experiencing some aha
Rehashing
moments.
something.
That's up to the point of us getting married. The only thing before then was going through the endowment, and that's probably more of a part 3 faith crisis because
That's the beginning of,
going through the endowment was
okay.
what started me down that path.
okay. So you got super active at the University of Utah, and then at some point McKay comes off his mission.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share? There was like a year between her getting endowed and me coming home from my mission. Was there?
I don't think
anything
so.
else you wanted?
Okay.
I don't think so. It was just like random Mormon in and out of relationships.
Yeah. Looking for your eternal companion.
Yeah.
In all the wrong places.
Considered going on a mission because I was like 22 and still wasn't married yet, or however the heck old I was.
You weren't even
Old
20.
maid.
21, 20,
even
however old I
21 yet.
was.
Well, I just
She was thinking she was an old maid at 19.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, I just want to say on behalf of our viewers and listeners, like both of you, but particularly Jordan, this episode, like this stuff you're sharing is super intense. It's super heavy, but it's super vulnerable and really admirable. I feel bad for your mom because like Kara was talking to me about free will and
That's all I think about.
like not to jump to the protection or defense of the abusers, but like at some level we're all a product of our biology, of our upbringing, of our environments. And so like on the one hand, I'm so frustrated at your upbringing and I'm so frustrated at your abuser and your mom. On the other hand, I'm feeling really sorry for her because if she ever hears about this, and she will in like 12 seconds from now, if not, she's already heard about it.
Yep.
It's going to probably be really hard and devastating for her, hard for your relationship. And how does anything ever change if we don't talk about it? Like silence is the enabler. Silence is the killer. And so I'm sad that you have to tell this story. I'm sad for your mom, but I know we do it for the victims, right?
Yeah. That's the whole point is this. It's all too common, unfortunately. The amount of women that I've encountered in similar situations, like it's appalling. This stuff thrives in the church. And I mean, that's not unique to Mormonism, but.
Can you even read all the emails you get in your inbox in DMs, Kara, of abuse victims in the Mormon church? Like,
No.
you can't even read them all. There's too many.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this isn't just like, we're picking the most controversial, scandalous stories. This is like a third of all Mormon women. I don't know.
Yep.
Well, anecdotally, I read a tweet this morning of a guy who used to teach Mormon Institute at the prison.
Yeah.
And he said in the sexual crimes pods, I think was the word he used, most of them were stake presidents and Area 70s and bishops and elders quorums presidents and a lot of returned missionaries. And it just fosters an environment for stuff like this to thrive, especially when most of your worthiness interviews are with a single person behind closed doors with a major power imbalance.
And this loops back to our interview with you, McKay, where you talk about learning the lie from a young age and learning to have a split life of what you present to the public and then what you're doing behind the scenes, plus all the sexual shame, plus all the, like raising the stakes way too high where it's sin next to murder. That is the breeding ground for abuse,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and patriarchy hurts men too. Like if it isn't devastating for women, it hurts men too. For all these reasons, get rid of patriarchy.
Seriously. It just creates a hot mess.
Yeah. And that's why Kara's my new boss. Kara, what should I do next? Because you're my boss.
Oh, should take us all out to dinner.
Okay.
Anyway.
Right. That's the deal.
Yeah. And I just want to also add for our Mormon listeners or nuanced or progressive listeners and things, I am interested to hear your thoughts and comments and questions and always want to hear perspectives from people from all over the Mormon and ex-Mormon and never Mormon perspective. And what I kind of just want to wrap up this part of this segment or this part of this episode is taking myself back to my Mormon mind. I would have heard Jordan's story and seen that as a product of just people not living up to the Mormon standards that they should have been. And then again, saying that if only people lived the Mormon standards, that everything would be fine. Yeah. But just you open up the court, like there's a corpse rotting here in this system of this Mormon belief that like we're talking about the stink. We're talking about the effects of acting like there's not like a rotting body just right in our living room right now. And the problem
Emperor's
is
new clothes.
systemic. Yeah, it's an Emperor's New Clothes problem. There's a systemic issue here that just people living up to the good old like Mormon standards and practices and following Jesus will not fix. And so I hope people from all over the Mormon spectrum will take from this that this is a systemic issue. There's abuse in and out of the church. We know that. But when you have a system that benefits from people being quiet and shoving things under the rug to protect the good name and not make people look bad and all of the things that Jordan just expressed, that is something that we need to call out repeatedly until it hopefully disappears.
And the solution's pretty easy. It's like, stop teaching that sexual exploration is a sin next to murder, so the stakes are not so high for children, teen, or adults. Get healthy sex education to everyone. Teach about consent to everyone in all areas, right? Stop one-on-one interviews with children and teens and adults where sexual matters are discussed with some random plumber bishop behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Oh, I got one. Stop acting like having natural sexual urges mean that you're possessed by Satan and that,
Good one.
that you lose like the spirit and like the power to have the Holy Ghost with you. Recognize what healthy, normal biology looks like and accept it point blank. Like,
yeah, and just the idea of worthiness. There's no such thing as worthiness. You're all worthy. Surprise, flash, newsflash. You're all worthy, period. Start there. No such thing as worthiness. No need for any man to ask you whether you're worthy. No need for a little plastic credit card to get you into some building as if that then endorses your worthiness. And no one has the right or privilege to judge your worthiness on God's behalf. You're just worthy, period, from the start. And then finally, like freaking Kurt McConkie and the law firms, stop protecting abusers at the expense of victims. Stop advising victims of abuse and their families to not go to the police. Have going to the police be the first line of reaction, and get the Utah legislature filled with Orthodox Mormons to make mandatory reporting inclusive for Mormon bishops and stake presidents so that they don't have some loophole.
Yep.
How's that? I think that's, can we just do that? Is that a good list?
I feel like we're at a rally and we're all just going
Yeah, I know, right? It kind of makes me wonder how much the monetary difference would be between having Curtin and McConkie counsel people on what to do in order to protect the name of the church and having PR people just clean up the mess behind them. Like, what really would the difference be between the two? Because then at least in the one situation, you can morally say, we do the right thing and make sure that the law of the land is enforced. Like we say in our article of faith that says that we abide by those things.
And we don't want to ever call the Mormon Church a cult here, but there's something that we share almost identically with Jehovah's Witnesses, which I think most Mormons would call a cult, Scientology, which I think most Mormons would call a cult.
We did.
And that's how we handle sexual abuse. And the Catholic Church, frankly, how we handle sexual abuse in the church is identical. It's almost like we share the same lawyers and that they're all sharing secrets. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, Scientologists, Catholics, evangelical Christians, and Mormons all handle sexual abuse the same horrific way. Sorry.
It's true.
I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there are other religions who are more transparent with their finances. There's more other religions that teach, consent and all of the things that John just
Episcopals,
mentioned.
Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists.
There is definitely a blueprint for how to do it better.
Yeah, they all do it. Right.
Yeah. There's a blueprint for how to do it better is what I think we're
healthy
just trying
sex
to communicate.
education, consent classes, no one-on-one anything, adults always present.
And that's why we always try to say that it's the system and not the people, because we know Mormons, they don't want, like I think of every Mormon I've ever known who's a genuine good person. They'd be horrified if somebody was covering up sexual abuse, and they'd want to out that person and make sure that that never happens in their community. Like, we were all Mormon at one time. We would be horrified. We would never want to cover that up. So copies of us in Mormon form still exist out there in the millions in the church. I know there are good people who want to see this kinds of change. And so when we talk about conditioning, the only way that we can actually is to put the church in a place where they need to move the way that the system operates. And that's why I mentioned, other various churches that have done it better. It's not an impossible task, Mormons, to make the church healthier and make it so less and less abuse happens. Yeah. We want that so much. Don't you guys, every Mormon listening that hates Mormon stories and hates the things that we're trying to advocate for that are healthier around sex and stuff. We all, at the end of the day, I think we want the same things.
Yeah.
We're just trying to figure out how we get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, and the church is such a central facet to the membership's lives that when we raise these issues and say, we don't hate Mormons, we hate the institutions and the people on the higher up levels of the church are enabling the very, very small minority of people to do bad things. And people take it as a personal attack. We have so much Mormon family still. We don't hate them because they are Mormon. We hate the church that they go to because of what it enables abusers to do, or
the separation of that identity.
The
that a lot
toxic
of Mormons can't make the differentiation.
Yeah, purity culture and things like that. So we don't hate you if you're Mormon.
Yeah, we're not anti-Mormon. We're anti-harming Mormons. We're anti a church that sometimes harms people, vulnerable populations. So we're here to help the Mormon church be healthier. We're to help Mormons, active Mormons, be experience less pain and suffering. That's what we're about. That's what we're for.
And even help the general membership realize that some of the things that go on in the church are abnormal and they're just policy kinds of things. Yeah, one-on-one interviews with a bishop.
With a 12-year-old girl asking her where she touches herself.
Yeah, that's not normal.
No.
In any sense of the word.
Or even tithing settlement, at the end of the year, hey, where's your money? How much did you pay? How much you make? How much did you pay? Oh, you can't go to your kid's wedding. Not normal. Not normal.
Not at all.
Not normal. Yeah.
You sound like a mob boss. They don't break your knees or anything.
They
just break your family eternally. Oh, me. Anyway.
Oh.
All right. Well, that's part 2. So now we've got McKay and now we've got Jordan. What an amazing 7 or 8 hours. And we still have the final part 3 to go. I don't know if we're going to do it tonight or another day, but we have part 3 to go, which is going to be they're meeting each other and how Jordan and McKay, what happened in terms of their relationship with the church once they met each other, got married, and had their child, their son, and what that's meant for their faith journey. And then what led them to become YouTubers. And why do you guys laugh every time I say world famous, super famous social influencers? Why do you laugh every time?
I don't think it's true. And also it's just imposter syndrome in full swing. So
it's imposter syndrome.
If you have videos with multiple videos with hundreds of thousands of views, come on, you're a big deal. Own it. You've eclipsed me. I'm retiring. I'm announcing my retirement because Jordan and McKay are here.
Don't put that on
Kara, sorry, you're out of a job because I'm retiring.
Too?
Sorry.
Well, Jordan McKay.
Yeah.
Jordan McKay.
Why would dynamic trio?
I'm homeless. Can I sleep on that bed in the back of your videos too?
That's where we sleep, but
oh great.
So if you
Three's company too. Okay.
Yeah. So maybe we'll have to do the anti-Mormon media syndicate or something.
The anti-Mormon media syndicate. That's what they wanted to call us.
I know.
The pro-Mormon media syndicate. Yeah.
The pro-Mormon health and happiness media syndicate.
Yeah. From the ex-Mormon perspective.
From the formerly Mormon, from the post-Mormon perspective.
The Mormon adjacent.
All right. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Hope you have really valued today's episodes. Thanks again to Jordan and McKay for their honesty, their vulnerability, their courage, their integrity. Please go make a difference in your Mormon world or your non-Mormon world. Be kind to each other, love each other, and come right back immediately. Binge watch part 3, where we're going to hear the epic conclusion to their Mormon story so far. and all their adventures as world famous post-Mormon YouTubers and influencers.
It's like a psychosomatic response at
I'm
this
milking
point.
this. I'm very bit. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Kara, thank you. You're awesome.
Yeah, no problem. It's been really fun.
All right. See you guys
Back
for part 3.
three. Bye.
See you soon.